Well, once again, welcome all of you to this update on our progress on a CCA for the county. It's given the upheaval in the energy markets from Putin's war on top of the already, intense inflation and gas and electric bills this winter. It's really a good thing that we're already working on reducing our exposure and our vulnerabilities by making some progress on providing our own energy. So just as a review and a reminder, it was a year ago, last March, that I worked with 9 municipalities, and we submitted a grant proposal to the Park Foundation to hire someone who would tell us what our options are, sort of around a CCA 2.0 version, trying to design for an eventual 3.0. And by the time we won that grant in July, by then Luis had been hired and let us know he was already working with Paul, and that they were going to go straight to the 3.0 version of a CCA, and so I guess it was late last summer that we all agreed to use the Park Foundation grant to hire Paul to get started in this process. And work with the city and town of Ithaca to get us to the point of launch. It's a long, complex process to get the approval from the PSC for CCA. And then once that is in place, then the other municipalities is really easy. The way the system works, just add in more municipalities once the infrastructure is built. So we're just acting, Sustainable Tompkins is just acting as a pass-through for those funds to get us through the first phase, and then the city of Ithaca will take over for supporting Paul and his crew to get us to the endpoint, to the launching point. I know that I and many other people in the sustainability and climate action movement are really glad that we're working on this. It's really complex. It's not the easy thing of just changing to a different ESCO, it's a lot more than that, but I think it's going to be really worth our effort in terms of protecting our communities into the future and getting through all these climate and energy market problems. So Paul's going to go next and walk us through what exactly are these elements of a 3.0 CCA, and then Rod and Luis will update us on, what the municipal process is for the town and the city. So.
Terrific, thank you. So I'll go at a fairly good clip, and we can always go back to a slide if you have any questions. So the first question is just what CCA is. And it's understood in different ways. As you just heard, it can just be signing up with an ESCO, but it can be a number. It's evolved over a 25-year period. But what it really is a structural transfer of control from energy suppliers to demand, the demand side, and specifically customers, but also municipalities, those who need energy. Are able to control the nature of the supply for utility service, broadly construed as including on an opt-out basis, enrolled on an opt-out basis, the small and medium electric and gas accounts, and then having the larger accounts enrollable on an opt-in basis. So you basically have the whole residential and small to medium commercial businesses that will be enrolled on an opt-out basis, but large businesses and the campuses can be included on an opt-in basis. So it can be an inclusive community energy supply, not merely a kind of segment, I guess, of the supply. The CCA, very importantly, has rate design and rate setting authority, which is really quite unique in many ways, because again, that's something usually that the utility has with regulatory oversight. In this case, the CCA can decide within state law how it wants to design rates. Therefore, it can innovate around different kinds of services. It doesn't have to use the sort of cookie cutter approach based on a conventional utility rate design. It has unique access to customer energy usage data. This is very important because that data unlocks the knowledge base for what kinds of measures make sense for a community, for individual residents and businesses based on their use of energy, which varies enormously in terms of the time of day, the amount of it, whether it's during the day or during the night. It's all very different, whether it's on the weekends, during the week. And so being able to know that and tailor renewable energy technologies that fit the way that someone uses energy is very, very powerful. There's the ability to recover administrative costs, which is sounds small, but for a lot of municipalities is a huge problem for trying to implement any sort of significant local programs, that they just don't have the funding for them. And if it's a new category of program, it takes years to fund them through general funds. This doesn't require any non-recoverable expenses. There are expenses along the way to implement, but you can recover them through the adopted Public Service Commission CCA order. And the approach that we're taking to CCA specifically, so-called 3.0, is supported by local government. So it's not merely an outsourced service to an ESCO, which is pretty much what you've had so far in New York. It's something that involves the local municipal government in the process, both for making investments on public properties. I'll get into that a bit, but also assisting with the enrollment, engagement, education of residents and businesses so that they understand that this is something different from what they've been offered in the past. And that's a big challenge in some ways. So today, CCAs serve 1,800 municipalities. 36 million Americans receive service from them. It's legal in half of the US market in terms of market size. So it's only 12 states, but it's half the US. It's a lot of the bigger energy markets, the bigger economies, that is. And then almost all the renewable energy communities, 100% renewable energy communities in America are CCA programs. So it's been around for a long time. It's been very successful economically and environmentally. But it's evolved, and it started in the mid-90s with a very simple idea of buying greener power cheaper. Not, if you aggregate your demand, could you get greener power supply? And would be served from the grid, but usually it would be served from renewable energy certificate purchasing with grid power. So it kind of stayed in that fairly narrow definition that you still have in New York mostly. 2.0 was developed more recently in California. And that involved building greener power portfolios at comparative rates. And this resulted in the past 5 years in 10 gigawatts of renewables. So billions of dollars of investment have been leveraged in California by these CCAs there. It's a total of 13 million customers in 200 municipalities and 18 CCAs that did that. But 10 gigawatts has really changed things in California in terms of greenhouse gas reductions, and it's way beyond what the state required, and it's actually lowered emissions for the utilities, for everyone. It's been very successful. But 3.0 was kind of what we took from the take back, I guess, the takeaway from all that work, which is really centered on decarbonization. So instead of just green power, instead of just green supply or building solar plants or wind plants, decarbonizing as a specific goal is really the kind of the paradigm, I guess you'd say. So part of the paradigm is that you go after all addressable carbon with the program. You're not just looking at electricity, plug power, right, which is electricity in buildings, which involves reducing community-wide grid imports, right? That's the plug power piece of it. And you do that by building local renewables on site that reduce the need at the meter for power coming in. And you do that at enough sites that you significantly affect the aggregate of all accounts behind the substations that drops. And that's about a quarter of its so-called addressable carbon, if you look at United Nations guidelines on this. It depends on where you live, but it's generally they cut fairly evenly, these categories of carbon. Heating and cooling and hot water would be the second category. So that's how do you reduce natural gas pipeline imports? And that's where the aggregation of gas comes in, that you want to take over heating fuel accounts in order to electrify those accounts, and in order to install on-site renewables for those electrifications, and to implement energy efficiency to reduce the needs in those buildings. Then thirdly, with vehicles, to reduce gasoline and diesel imports into the community, and that's through electrification of vehicles. And then finally, the kind of outlier here is waste, which is actually the third largest cause of greenhouse gas emissions in your community. It's not the smallest, and it's ignored by most communities. So you have communities that are 100% renewable that have completely unreformed waste policies. And so we're looking to bring waste into that discussion. That includes both the non-recyclable post-consumer waste that's going into power plants and landfills, often exported to poor communities, and sewage exports, which are no less a problem with PFA contamination in rivers. It's a real disaster. So trying to bring the 4 addressable source of carbon into the program definition, and then overcome a lot of the barriers to distributed energy resource and local solar and efficiency and electrification choice decisions by consumers. All this complexity and technology, evaluating technology, we use a data tailored distributed energy resource package, which enables essentially the use of the utility history on each meter to look at what is the budget for that customer for energy, and to project measures that match their energy usage and their levels of usage, so to help them make those decisions through the CCA itself, not through a commercial party, right? Not depending upon a commercial party to tell you which technology, but having a trusted third party. Then ownership requirements, which exclude the vast majority, we overcome with a shares service, which we call universal shares. Isolation of customers, which drives up the cost of renewable measures, we deal with through a cooperative service, so neighbors can share heating systems and share vehicles and share solar panels on microgrids or just between 2 buildings, nanogrids. Credit requirements, which are quite severe for owning any part of solar or local renewables, we solve with municipal loan assistance. We'll have to get into that because it's one of the kind of the factors of delivering the program. Net metering, which is a big barrier because it requires exporting power onto grids that are clogged up with exports. We get around through a non-exporting strategy that integrates heat, power, and automobiles in order to increase self-consumption and not need to export power back onto the grid to pay for the system, in a nutshell. And finally, around restrictive billing, we develop a municipal loan administration program to have a portal on which the decision to invest and the payment of bills each month are monitored under local government administration. So the basic customer experience is, you sign up, you don't opt out, and you sign up for a premium to own your power, right? To own solar, to own community solar, or to own something on your building. If you have a building, to own it down the block. If you don't, to own it on a municipal building. Shares in larger systems. To get a loan that your monthly payment of that premium will repay. To get, therefore, monthly bill offsets or off-bill credits, but with cash value credits based on your ownership from that loan. You would be eligible as a renter or an owner, so it wouldn't be restricted as almost all programs are. And it would require participation by building owners and neighbors, obviously. So you've got a share system that is flexible and any individual can sign up for, or you have on-building microgrids that involve more cooperation between the owner and the neighbors. So there are these 2 different, I'm going to get into the details, so I made black slides to indicate complexity. These 2 products, one is a shares, so-called shares product, and that's for any customer, because it's really designed for the neglected class of customers, the majority who don't qualify under the current system. It allows financial participation only. So it wouldn't be, if it'd be for a renter who can't put it on their own roof, it would be shares in a system down the street, right? It would, through a simple checkbox choice to enroll in that service, and then being referred to an energy loan portal where loan options that have been pre-qualified and vetted are linked. So that's the general share strategy. Then there's a microgrid strategy or a thermal loop strategy. Usually it will be both. That involves concentrations of buildings, which are opportunities for cooperatives where people, neighbors and businesses can physically share on-site renewable heating systems, on-site renewable power, and automobiles. I'm going to try to keep it a good clip. I don't want to take too much time here. We can go back to that if you have questions. But in terms of the authority, this is the CCA assisting customers in voluntary investment through an agreement with each municipality. So it would be essentially a transaction between the CCA itself, as of which the municipality is a member, and the municipal government, which is sort of keeping track of what people are doing and what they're getting for it, and having a neutral place where the reports are recorded so the customer can see whether it's paying off like it was supposed to. And the CCA can see if contractors are causing lots of complaints and that sort of thing. So the CCA administrator would then audit bills using the data to look at that energy wallet for payback projections, and then would come up with optimal options for each customer. You know, if you're a renter, you're in an apartment, you're in a house, you're in a farm, you're a business, these factors affect what you would be offered based on what fits you, where there would be a good return on investment for you as a borrower. Then the CCA would once a customer selects, affirms the desire to receive bids from qualified bidders, the CCA would then solicit bids from those bidders, and the customers would select both the source of financing and the vendor or vendors in the project. And then the CCA then would place the product on opt-out notifications and utility bill accounts online, so that the options were offered to every customer. So as far as like what are the roles of the CCA administrator, we are pursuing a lead agency approach in which the city of Ithaca will serve to facilitate this more robust form of CCA, first with administration, which includes procurement, reporting, primitive power, reporting to the Public Service Commission and the municipality, sending out opt-out notifications to customers, and providing billing support each month to provide billing for these voluntary investment customers. And then under management, there would be ongoing RFPs from the continuing solicitation of vendors to install systems. You would have the administration of the equity program or the voluntary investment program through shares and cooperatives. You'd have the collection and management of data for that to support that process. And then there'd be coordination and management directly with each municipality to keep their energy loan portals current and to enroll customers as they come in. And then finally, implementation, there's the ongoing work, right? The idea is a 2030 schedule for decarbonization in the city of Ithaca. Each municipality has its own targets, but so it varies by town, and ultimately each town is going to make decisions that affect how much and how fast you're going on all of these scores. But there's distributed energy resource development, there's site acquisition, there's customer development, that's like getting people to sign up, offering them products, tailoring those products. There's the customer data hub, which is managing and using all the data. There is customer service, which is an 800 number complaint service that feeds into a customer relations management database. There is eventually we will create a job order system for contractors once the development starts for pre-qualification of contractors. And finally, there will be, in the long term, oversight of a turnkey development operation of DERs within the community over the long term, because these are 10 to 25 year warranted systems that will have contractors maintaining them and operating them for the life of the asset. Finally, there's the questions. I know there have been questions about how does this differ from community distributed generation, CDG, and I'll quickly go through it just to start the conversation when this ends. But the first thing is that CDG is based on enrolling customers in investments without permission, right? They will enroll based on an opt-out basis the way a CCA would, but not in a power service, instead in an investment. The CCA program would enroll each customer voluntarily, and it would require 2 affirmative choices to enroll. So it's sort of the opposite end of opt-out. It's engaging people very deliberately in voluntary investment in which they're buying something, and so it's setting them up first to set up the payment system with the CCA, and secondly to set up the loan repayment system that the CCA itself will process each month based on their paying the monthly bill premium. Second, CDG costs more than market power. So the ability to provide the service depends upon a statewide subsidy pool that's carved out from funds that are paid by every New York State customer. It's a limited pool, sorry, the typo there, to sweeten the deal and deliver customer savings. It's very important to understand that with subsidized programs, subsidies limit the ability, the amount that you can actually develop. If the subsidy runs out, then they stop. That there's no, it's not an unlimited fund. But CCA 3.0, the distributed energy resources cost less than market power in terms of the customer's investment in the power. They're money saving as investments, and they don't require subsidies. They do not access subsidies and are not limited by the absence of subsidies. Thirdly, community distributed generation pays the bill credits month by month. It's an ongoing payment. You pay as you pay a premium each month, you receive a credit. But the moment that you stop doing so, the credit ceases. The program we're setting up here is true equity, right? You're making a loan-based voluntary investment with a return based on a projected return on investment, similar to buying solar and putting it on your roof, where you're buying it, it's going on your roof, and you hope to save money once it pays back. It's the very same structure as opposed to a sort of virtual form of community distributed generation where it's not yours. Fourth, CDG is severely limited in the scale to the source of funding. I guess this is duplicative, pardon me. It's not limited, 3.0 is not limited because it's based on investment. This here is an image of the interconnect queue for Ithaca. There's already a queue today with very little renewable energy development going on. Very low levels are going on, and you have a queue of systems that can't get connected because there's no capacity on the transmission. There's a list like this in every town in New York. The list is a traffic jam. And so to the extent that your systems and CDG systems need to export power onto the grid doesn't have capacity. You have very highly congested corridors where there literally is no capacity. So they would have to upgrade the transmission grid to add a solar farm that someone owns because they're using this highway to move the power around. The 3.0 program DER is on buildings. It sets up systems of self-consumption using on-site heat and electric vehicles. They don't export energy back onto the grid, and they have no interconnection limit. There is no waiting line for that. So in sum, it's really an issue of scale that CDG gives you a tiny fragment of just plug power mitigations in terms of carbon, a tiny fragment of 1/4 of addressable carbon. So you're talking about 1/20th, 1/50th. 3.0 addresses all of your electricity. There is no limit on what you could install electrically, and a majority of your addressable carbon. So it's just a matter of really of scale and the difference. And I will wrap it up there.
What we want to communicate is that our interest in CCA is because it's going to help us meet our Green New Deal goals that we set. And it potentially is connected to other things. Louise might certainly mention the electrification initiative in the city. Yesterday, TCOG's Energy Committee started a discussion about what are the impacts as we continue to electrify in terms of the current infrastructure meeting those needs. So it ties into other ongoing strands of discussion as well. Nick, I think you can move on, and I'll turn it over to you, Nick.
Thanks, Rod. And I'll go through these pretty quickly, but of course we can go into more detail in the Q&A section. So how can the CCA program help meet our goals? We've covered some of this through Paul and Rod's notes. I think for all of our towns and municipalities, buildings, transportation, and where's energy coming from are the three major sources of carbon emissions, as Paul already mentioned. And the CCA really has huge potential to reduce emissions in all of these areas. I won't go into detail because we've heard a lot about this, but it is exciting, just the potential scale of the program. And I wanted to highlight that, so Paul went through sort of the whole menu of options, and the way we're trying to set it up is so that different municipalities can kind of pick and choose to make the program work best for them. So not an all or nothing approach. So we just listed a few of the program elements. So I think the city is going to do all the listed things here on the slide. The town's still considering whether or not or can it participate in some of them. And so just wanted to highlight that the choice is up to you, and want to have a kind of continuous discussion about what makes sense for your municipality and how to make the CCA work broadly but efficiently. Rod, did you have a comment?
I just want to mention that we borrowed this slide from Paul. So Paul, thank you for letting us take this slide and adapting it a little bit.
Of course, my pleasure.
Also wanted to highlight that, so we went through a lot of information just now. There are a lot of details to work out. So one of the next deliverables from this project, right now we're working through the local ordinances to enable the CCA program. There's going to be a detailed implementation plan, which goes into more detail on the various components. So we just listed a few aspects, which, we're still kind of hashing out how it makes the most sense. And again, your municipality might choose to do it slightly different. So the program administrator, how does that work? The city of Ithaca has offered to be the administrator. So how do we as other municipalities work with the city? Paul alluded to a MOU, sort of what details are included in the MOU, for instance. Education and outreach haven't quite gotten there, but sort of what would municipalities be responsible for in terms of education and outreach to their own constituents. A couple more things we're still working out. The distributed energy resources program, there's a lot in there, a whole lot of detail, but it's not all settled yet. So that's under discussion. Did someone say something? It's okay.
Background noise.
Yep. And then for financing, how and if to whether to offer financing. So for example, the town's still trying to figure out how or if we can offer a loan program that Paul alluded to. And if not, what other options might we use to still take advantage of these distributed energy resource options for our residents? Equity and social justice aspects. We really want to ensure affordable access to clean electric supply, fossil-free energy. Can we offer that at an affordable rate to all who are interested? It's just, of course, an overarching concern. So just to highlight that there's still a lot to be worked out, but we have come a long way since the beginning. I'm going to turn it over to Luis here, who's going to talk about the city's perspective.
Where the city is at right now, we are identifying what the requirements are from a staffing point of view and the organization point of view for being the CCA administrator. So right now we are having conversations actively yesterday and tomorrow with the city attorney's office, the comptroller's office, the clerk, the chamberlain's office. So pretty much everybody that will be impacted by this. And the conversation has been going the right direction. It's just a lot of information to get through. And there's a lot of new stuff that most people in the city are learning. So right now, I don't anticipate any problems, but I do anticipate some time before everybody is 100% comfortable with everything that we're doing. And then we'll start moving in that direction. I think Nick made several points right now about what will happen when we start working on the implementation plan. So I think at this point, the way I would try to summarize everything that has been said here is the intention is to do to provide the opportunity for all municipalities in Tompkins County to be part of a community choice aggregation program. This program it's really modular, if you want to look at it that way. So you can join in parts of it. You don't have to do all of the elements. If you want to do community choice aggregation with the investment option that Paul presented, that is the CCA 3.0, there is a possibility that we can do that, and still the city may be able to coordinate some of the loans. But you don't need to be part of the whole thing. At the end of the day, and we've been having conversations in different forums with different members of this call about what it means to really try to strive for carbon neutrality, to reduce emissions from the electric grid, from any use inside buildings. There's a number of things that need to combine. So I would also invite you to look at CCA not in isolation, not as a new program, but as part of an overall strategy to decarbonize Tompkins County. And what we are proposing is something that can be very useful. It's definitely not the only way of doing this. I believe it is something that we understand well and that can be very useful for all of us to meet our goals. So I think I'm going to stop there because I think everything has been covered.
Yeah, Louise, maybe just, or maybe Paul, just update us on the timeline. You know, obviously this is complex. You know, things always take you longer than you think you're going to take. You set up a timeline like, okay, by this March, we're going to be here. We're a little bit behind schedule. But Louise or Paul, maybe you can just remind us on sort of our new timeline and when we would expect to start working on reaching out to other municipalities and intermunicipal agreement, all that. We have some other steps to get through first with the state.
So this is where we're at now. Second deliverable is finishing up the CCA ordinance for the city and town, and a research report which explains or contextualizes those two documents based on, I think it was 20 individuals interviewed in the city and the town within the administration of each. In May to June, we're anticipating or hoping we'll get a vote on the local law. Pardon me, it's not an ordinance; it's a local law. And then with an administrative report, and that's when we provide the details of how the lead agency will work that will administer the CCA, and that is going to be in July. And then this is what follows once we get through that, and that's as Gay mentioned, that's when we change from being funded by Park Foundation Sustainable Tompkins as the pass-through to the city of Ithaca. And that will include the data protection plan, which is all about how to protect the data I was talking about under the Public Service Commission order. And there are a bunch of rules about how to do that. A finance plan, that's when the details of the financing approach that I described will be fully articulated. And that is meant, it will be mentioned, it is mentioned in the local law, but it's in that finance plan that the local government really sorts out how it's going to do that. And then the customer engagement plan, there's also a lot about engagement in the presentation, but there is a required plan under the CCA order that is really just looking at, how are you educating people? How are you engaging them? How are you engaging the underserved population in particular? How are you engaging them? In our case, we're unusual in actually being particularly focused on underserved populations. And then finally, the implementation plan that goes to the Public Service Commission for approval. And so, that is going to be that's October 16th that we're now looking at with some data collection going on at the same time and outreach to you, which will recur. And that's when we anticipate some more discussion like this about whether you want to join it as a member, whether you want to hold off and wait until we launch, because we're basically about to launch. And once we get the plan approval from the Public Service Commission, now this is anticipating March 2023, we'll be then negotiating with suppliers, both with the grid power supplier, the ESCO, and with distributed energy resource vendors and lenders, as we described in both of the local laws. And then once those responses are complete, we'll give recommendations, just evaluating the bid responses and the town councils and common councils will individually make a decision on whether to select those suppliers. Now, as I said, the distributed energy resource development is ongoing, and so you're selecting an ESCO supplier. With the DERs, you're putting out RFPs that are part of a job order system of sorts with multiple suppliers. So it's not as though you're selecting developers as municipalities, but you are we are administering the pre-qualification processes within which many RFPs will be issued for many projects, with the customers themselves deciding which vendor to select from the bidding processes. All right. Well, I'll hand it back to you. That's the end of this.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah, I thought folks would want to see sort of the timeline because we realize that some municipalities were looking forward to this information. It's not going to answer all your questions. And so we are now going to open it up for Q&A, but we don't want to hold anyone back if they feel that 3.0 isn't the way to go for them. We know that municipalities might make other decisions. I do want to stress that there is, we're hoping that many municipalities will choose to wait and join, but you wouldn't have to sign on to all the components in this. So as Nick alluded to, the town of Ithaca might choose not to participate in some of those elements. So we're opening it up for Q&A.